So, Mr. McCabe, with what's for you and what's up on the screen as the exhibits, there are sort of green bubbles and blue bubbles, correct?
Correct.
And can you tell the jury as far as who's communicating which direction, as far as the green bubbles are who and the blue bubbles?
Green is John and blue is myself.
And so the first text from this particular date, if you could just read to the jury as far as from whom the message is sent, what the content is, and then what the time is.
So John sent to me where to at 12:14.
And if it assists you, if you have that in front of you.
Okay.
So the next bubble down is a blue bubble, is that correct?
Correct.
Similar to the one before, can you just read as far as that? Well, before I get to that, I'm sorry. So you receive that message from Mr. O'Keefe. You call him, have a conversation. He calls you back for the conversation.
Correct.
And then subsequent to that, could you read the next blue bubble down as far as from whom, what the content is, and what time it is?
So this one is from myself to John, and it says here at 12:27. So at that point, I see a car out front, and I text him here.
Testified to as far as looking out the front storm door, seeing a car, and then he sent the text. That's the text.
Correct.
And Ms. Gilman, if you could scroll down to that. And ma'am, similar, if you could just, who sent it, what's the content, and what is the time?
I sent to John, pull behind me at 12:31.
And what were you referring to when you said pull behind?
So at this point, the car had moved from the prior spot where I originally saw it. So I thought, what is he doing? Why don't they just pull behind me in the driveway?
You just scroll down. And again, with this bubble, if you could read out.
From me to John saying hello, and it was at 12:40.
And at this point in time, as far as, let me ask you this way. When you're sending these text messages over these periodic time periods, what, if anything, are you doing sort of in between?
So I originally went to the front door, saw the car, texted them, then texted John. Then I went back, kind of sat at the table, just either threw my phone probably in my back pocket. And then a couple minutes later, I got up again and saw that the car had moved. So I had sent the pull behind me. And then a few minutes later, I went back to the front door, I'm sorry.
And when you went back to the front door, what, if anything, did you see about?
So at this specific point at 12:40, when I say hello, I cannot be certain whether they were still out front or if they had left.
And from any of these text messages that you sent, what, if any, response did you receive from Mr. O'Keefe after the where to?
None.
Ms. Gilman, if you could, to the next bubble. And similar to the prior one that you just read.
Sure. Jen to John, where are you? And that was at 12:42.
So the next bubble.
Myself to John, hello, at 12:45.
Now this is later in the morning, and we'll get to that a little bit more in a moment, but at some point you left the residence of Fairview, you went home, and you were awoken by something, and then at some point you texted John later on that morning, 29th.
Yes.
You know, the next couple of those text messages that you sent at that point,
Correct.
you could just, similar to the other ones we've been using.
Myself to John, please answer at 4:59. Myself to John, Karen is worried. We need to find you at 4:59. Myself to John, please answer so I know you're okay. 5:04.
May I approach this retreat?
Yes.
Now, Ms. McCabe, I can take you back to at the house on Fairview. Again, you're sending these text messages and going back to the table and then going back to the window at various times.
To the front door.
To the front door.
Yes.
And at any point in time, do you see anybody exit from the dark SUV or the black SUV you see in front of the house?
No.
And at any point in time, did John O'Keefe come into the house?
No.
And at any point in time, did John O'Keefe respond to your text messages?
No.
At any point in time, did John O'Keefe call?
No.
Now, at some point subsequent to this, have you had occasion to look at your phone or at your call history?
Yes.
And through review of that, were you able to see phone calls that your phone made to John O'Keefe's phone around that same time frame that you were texting him and going to the school?
Yes.
May I approach Ron?
Yes.
Ma'am, I'm showing you a 4-page document. Actually, look at that and look up when you're finished. And if I could suggest, I think it starts in reverse order from page 4, timing-wise, up through page 1. Just generally speaking, ma'am, do you recognize what's contained in that 4-page document?
I do.
And what do you recognize?
The calls between myself and John O'Keefe.
And am I correct that it starts in sort of a ascending order as far as the earliest calls are on page 4 and then the most recent are on the first page?
Yes.
And the phone calls that you were testifying to about before, as far as talking to him on the way from the waterfall to residents at Fairview, did they appear in those?
They do.
Objection, may we push briefly?
Okay, may I have that? Okay.
So, Ms. McCabe, as far as the first calls that you were testifying about, as far as when you spoke to Mr. O'Keefe on the way from the waterfall to the residents at Fairview, were those contained within those calls?
Yes.
As far as, is there a time that's associated with those calls that you observe in those 4-page documents?
Yes.
And what are
12:14 and 12:18.
And turning your attention to page 1, that would be sort of the last in line there. What time is the last call between yourself and Mr. O'Keefe, and who's calling?
I'm calling him at 5:25.
Okay. May I approach him?
Yes.
I'll want to seek to introduce him as the next exhibit.
Is there any objection?
There's not, Your Honor. Thank you.
Is it 990? Thank you.
Now, Ms. McCabe, you had mentioned that during the course of the evening, shortly after you arrived at the residence of Fairview, you observed a vehicle outside of your sister's house, correct?
Yes.
And Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to publish with this witness Exhibits 71, 72, and 73.
Okay.
And Ms. McCabe, first and foremost, what's up on the screen is Exhibit 71. Do you recognize that?
I do.
Okay, I think you can just go right to what you wanted to identify, please, Mr. Lally.
So, Ms. McCabe, in front of you on the desk, there should be a laser pointer. Just click on the button and point at the screen. And if I could ask if you could direct, well, first and foremost, with respect to this photograph, do you observe in this photograph where you first saw the black SUV in front of the house?
It was directly if I was staring out the front door. So this angle is kind of unique to see it. But if you go from the front door directly straight out, so maybe the edge, if you understand what I'm saying.
Using that just direct to his attention.
So if there's the front door and I look straight out, but the perception is almost like a side view. It's not straight on, so it could have been a little over here.
So, Lally, why don't you show another picture if this one isn't helpful?
If I could have Exhibit 7. Is it visible in this photograph?
Yes, so just follow this and then come straight.
And lastly, Exhibit 7. Now, Mr. McCabe testified that at another point you come to the front door and you observe the vehicle in a different spot, correct?
Correct.
If you could, again, using the laser pointer, just direct your attention to where in this photograph, if at all, you observe with the vehicle in a second.
It was right about, right near the flagpole.
Okay. This gentleman, you can take that. Now, turning your attention to back in the home, at some point you indicated you looked out and didn't see the black SUV there anymore.
Correct.
And what was your thought as far as where John was or where John had gone at that point?
At that point, I thought maybe they decided not to come in. Maybe they got into an argument, or maybe Kaylee had called.
Did you think much of it at that point?
No.
Now, you leave the home around what time?
Approximately 1:30, roughly 1:30, 1:45.
And when you leave, who, if anyone, goes with you?
So it's myself, my husband Matt, and I had offered, when Julie Nagel's brother had come to the house earlier, I had offered Julie and Sarah Levinson a ride home because we had just gotten there and they had wanted to stay later. So I also drove home Julie and Sarah. Well, my husband drove them home.
And so you exit the house, go out to the vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And your husband Matt was driving?
Yes.
Where are you seated in the car?
And the front seat.
And do you recall where Ms. Levinson and Ms. Nagel were seated in the car?
They were in the back seat.
Do you recall which one was on which side?
I do not.
And when you come out of the house and you're starting to go home, what, if anything, had changed as far as the weather from when you had gone in to when you had come out?
The snow had, accumulated more.
And when you get into the vehicle and as the vehicle is pulling away, what, if any, conversation do you recall having with anyone in the car?
When I got in the car, I kind of turned around to Julie.
I'm going to allow this subject to maybe restraint. There's a portion that's relevant. Go ahead.
I turned around and was facing them and talking to them. And I believe Sarah Levinson had laughed or made a joke because I had bread or something in my car. And we made a joke about that. I had my niece earlier that week for the week. And so I had brought stuff in the car because I was dragging her from one of my kids' sporting events to the next.
And as, do you recall which direction, or did you observe which direction your husband Matt exited from residence in Fairview? And by that I mean, did he head towards Chapman or did he head towards
Chapman.
And so as far as, I may not have asked this before, but as far as the black SUV that you observed in front of the house, which direction was that vehicle facing?
Chapman.
Each of the times that you saw it?
Yes.
And so as with that vehicle as with the one that your husband was driving, which side of the vehicle would have been closest to the house in Fairview?
Passenger.
Now, as you're driving past the house, heading to the house, how were you positioned within the car?
I'm turned chatting to the girls.
So, and when you're turned, are you turned towards the window or are you turned towards the console? Which way are you turned?
Turn the console towards the back seat. So my back is to the window.
And either of these girls, did you know where they lived?
No.
Do you recall whether or not you found their homes by way of sort of yes, or was it just sort of verbal directions?
I'm assuming they just gave Matt directions to where they lived.
So you drop each of them off. Do you recall which order they were dropped off in?
Julie, then Sarah.
And then following dropping off Sarah, where did you and your husband go?
Home.
And this whole trip sort of from Fairview to dropping off Ms. Nagel, Ms. Levinson, and then going home, about how long a period of time did that take?
It could be 20, 30 minutes, maybe about approximately 20 minutes. Not exactly sure.
You arrived home sometime after 2 a.m., is that correct?
Yes.
And when you and your husband Matt got home, went inside the house, and where did you go?
I went upstairs to bed.
And at some point, did your husband come up as well?
He did.
Was it a long period of time between when you arrived home and when your husband came up?
I don't think too long. I think he had like some cheese or something because he was on a crazy diet, and then he came upstairs.
Now, did you go right to sleep, or what, if anything, did you do when you went up to bed?
I asked him to watch a show. He said no, he was going to fall asleep, which he does usually immediately, and I went on my phone.
And what, if anything, do you recall doing on your phone as far as going on?
I was researching, my husband and I did briefly talk. My daughter had gotten an offer to play on a club
Just tell us what you were doing, please.
Sure. I was researching a basketball team, and I believe I also texted my sisters, and I texted in a group chat with my husband and another individual.
Now, if I could just turn your attention back to when you were at the house on Fairview that evening, and I believe this is the last time, so I apologize for the back and forth, but when you were there, what, if any, videos or any music or anything did you pull up on your phone to share with the group that you were there?
So one of my sisters loves this song, Raining Men. And she always, well, not always, maybe every once in a while, she's a little too much to drink and takes out an umbrella and sings and dances. And it's like a big family joke. And my other nephew had previously been over and showed me the video from whenever, I don't know if it's the 1970s, of It's Raining Men. So I just was playing it, showing my other nieces and nephews, and we were just like laughing because they all have umbrellas, and it's just something, it's like an inside family joke. So I played that, I think, a couple of times.
And so after you get home and you're looking at the basketball program and things of that nature, what, if anything, else did you do before you went to bed? Or went to sleep, I should say?
Nothing. I possibly could have gotten up to go to the bathroom. I do that almost every night.
Now, at this time you had an iPhone, is that correct?
Yes,
Did you also have an Apple Watch?
I did, yes.
And do you recall whether or not you were wearing the Apple Watch that evening or when you went to bed or anything like that?
I do not recall.
And as far as the Apple Watch is concerned, is that something that you routinely or always take off before you go to bed? Or not?
Mostly, but not always. I mean, there are times I go to bed with it on. More often than not, I take it off, but there are times that I do sleep with it.
And with respect to this particular evening, do you recall whether you had it on or whether you took it off or even had it on at all that night?
I don't recall if I had it on that night.
Now, Turning back to that last exhibit, as far as the phone calls were concerned, were there certain phone calls that you made to Mr. O'Keefe's phone around the time that you were observing the vehicle outside?
Yes,
Do you recall making any phone calls to Mr. O'Keefe at that time?
I don't.
Fair to say that at no point while you saw the vehicle outside did you have any conversation with Mr. O'Keefe?
I didn't.
Now, you go to sleep, and at some point later on in the morning, you wake up, correct?
Correct.
And what is it that wakes you up, and when about was that?
I woken up to my phone ringing.
And do you know what time it was?
4:53.
And according to your phone, who was calling you at 4:53?
John's niece.
And so that would be John's niece, Kaylee, is that correct?
Correct.
And how old was she at this time?
I believe she was 14.
And she had just gotten into Bishop Thean, correct?
Correct.
So she was in 8th grade going in, finishing up her 8th grade year of middle school, correct?
Yes.
Is that a normal thing, that Kaylee would be calling you at 4:53 in the morning on a Saturday?
No.
So you answer the call, is that correct?
Yes.
When you answer the call, who, if anyone, is initially on the other end?
Initially, it's Kaylee.
And what, if anything, did Kaylee say to you?
That John didn't come home and Karen and we wanted to talk to me.
And even in that initial call when you're speaking to Kaylee, what, if anything, do you hear sort of in the background when you're talking?
Karen screaming.
And could you hear what she was screaming?
She was just screaming, Jen, Jen, Jen.
Fairly loudly, is that correct?
Extremely.
Now, at some point, does the defendant get on the phone with you?
She does.
And what, if any, conversation do you have with her at that point?
She proceeds to scream my name multiple times, and she tells me that John didn't come home, they got into a fight, and that she left him at the waterfall.
And how do you respond?
I had just woken up. I was confused. I didn't know what she was talking about. I was like, what are you talking about? And then she, told me that they had gotten into a fight and she left him there. And now where is he? And she was just kept screaming my name over and over. And so then I remembered that Chris Albert had still been at the bar. So I thought, well, maybe John walked home with Chris because Chris lives close to the waterfall.
And so at some point that conversation ended and you recall how that ended?
I told her that I was going to call Julie and see if John had ended up with Chris.
And so you hang up with her, and then what did you do then?
I called Julie Albert.
And did Julie pick up the phone?
She did not.
And as you were calling Julie, did you have any conversation with your husband, Matt, around that time?
Yes. He, had kind of shot up out of bed when Karen had called. When Kaylee had called, because Karen was screaming. And then he was, what's going on? And I said, well, I'm calling Julie because Karen, they got into a fight, and I was trying to explain it to him. And he said, what are you talking about? We saw them outside of your sister's house. And at that point, I hung up.
And when you hung up, Julie had not answered yet, is that correct?
Correct.
Now, as far as Miss Reed, is that someone who had your phone number? Did you have her plugged into your phone as a contact before that date of January 29th?
No.
So never had any kind of conversation with her over the phone as far as a text or a phone call or anything? You didn't even have her information?
Correct.
And so after hanging up while calling Julie, what, if anything, did you do then?
And then I'm not sure if I called Kaylee back or if Kaylee called me back.
But at some point you get back in touch with Kaylee, or at least her phone, correct?
Yes, I get in touch with Karen again, and I say, Karen, we saw you outside of my sister's.
And what was her response to that?
She told me that she didn't remember going there, and then she started yelling, Jen, Jen, and then she was saying, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? And then she proceeded to say that she had a cracked taillight.
And this is while you're still in your home and you're in your bedroom, correct?
Correct.
And what was your response to that?
I thought she was honestly like just talking crazy. And then she said, oh my God, I left him there. Like she was extremely irrational. She said that it told me again that they had gotten into a fight. So now she was just kind of all over the place, just screaming. She was very hard to understand. So my brain started going, okay, well, if she left him there, where could he be? Who could he be with?
As you're going through that sort of process, what did you do next?
So then earlier in the night, there was another individual who we had been in contact with, or my husband had been talking to, and he had mentioned that he was gonna meet up with John at Waterfall as well, but he never ended up coming. I knew he was at a house close to Fairview, so I thought, well, maybe if they got into a fight, like John might have texted this individual, and maybe he just ended up on his couch.
Who was that individual?
Tom Beatty.
And who is Tom Beatty in relation to, how did you know him?
He has 2 daughters that are the same age as my daughters.
One of those daughters at least around the same age as Kaylee?
Yes.
And so based on sort of that process, thought process and what you're doing, what did you do then?
So then I start calling Tom.
And at any point in time that you called Tom, did Tom pick up the phone? Did you speak with him?
He did not.
And so following that, what did you do?
So I know at some point I was starting to call John. My husband was as well. At that point, I get up and I'm like, okay, well, got to go out and look for him. And in my head, I was thinking I'll drive over to Tom's and maybe he's there. I then go downstairs. Matt gets up. He's starting to get dressed. I go downstairs. I make a coffee. And I'm not sure how much time passed, but then all of a sudden I hear screaming out front.
Now, if I could just take it back for a second, as far as a decade or so that you had known and been friends with John O'Keefe, with his either his niece or his nephew or both home, is him not coming home, is that something that had ever happened before, you were ever aware of before?
I was never.
Ask it to.
Had John ever gone out at night and then not come home when the kids were home?
Objection.
I'm gonna allow it.
Not to my knowledge, no.
So at some point you make your way downstairs, is that right?
Correct.
And then what, if anything, did you hear once you were downstairs?
Screaming
And where was the screaming coming from?
out front.
And when you heard that screaming, where did you go?
I ran to my front door.
At some point, did you open your front door?
I opened my front door, correct.
And then what did you see when you opened the front door?
Miss Reed came running up my walkway.
And prior to, during any of the other conversations that you had had with Miss Reed, did you know where she was when you were talking to her?
No.
Obviously, the first call was Kaylee calling from the house. That was
Yes.
the assumption.
Mhm.
And then
So
subsequent.
is that a yes or no?
Yes.
And as far as the second call that you were talking about, do you know where she was when she was talking to you then?
The first couple calls, I know she was at the house, and then I don't know.
So was opening your door, hearing the screaming from out front, was that something that surprised you?
Yes.
And when you hear the screaming, if you could just explain to the jury, how loud was the screaming that you were hearing?
Very loud.
And what, if anything, was she saying at this point?
It was more of the, Jen, did I hit him? And then she would yell, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? And then she was yelling, we have to go to Fairview.
And in addition to Miss Reed, what, if anything, else did you see when you opened up the door?
Just,
Ask in a better way. Did
Yeah.
you see a vehicle?
yes,
And where was the vehicle and what did the vehicle look like?
it was in my driveway. I believe the driver door was left open.
And what kind of vehicle was it?
A black Lexus.
Consistent with what you had seen outside of Fairview the night or earlier in the morning.
Yes.
And so as she's coming up your walk towards your front door,
Running, yes.
And then what, if any, conversation did you have with her there in reference to that?
I just said, Karen, Karen, I was trying to calm her down. Matt came, I believe, and was yelling down that she was going to wake up the neighborhood. And then she was yelling that we had to go to Fairview. So I told Matt that I was going to go with Karen.
Initially, before that, what were your plans as far as going to look for John before Ms. Reed showed up at your house?
My husband and I were going to go to Tom Beatty's.
Now, once you decide that now you're going with Ms. Reed, the defendant, where did the two of you go?
So as we walked out, there was a car pulled up and then a plow.
Recognize the car that pulled up?
No.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. So the car pulls up and then the plow, and then what happened?
So in the car was Kerry Roberts. And so she kind of rolled down the window and was like, Karen, what are you doing? And then the plow was behind her. So Kerry pulled up and I told Karen that I was going to drive her car because I didn't want her driving because she was hysterical. So we got in her car and then Kerry Roberts called Karen. And then Karen was screaming and, saying that she had cracked her taillight. We need to go to Fairview. Could I have hit him? Did I hit him? And then she would just scream our names. Kerry was telling her to shut up, that we needed to just go back to John's and we'll drive in one car and let's go to John's. Maybe he's there and he's passed out and you didn't see him.
When you open up the door initially and you come outside and you see the defendant out there screaming and all of that, again, with respect to the weather, what was the weather at that point?
It was like dark and it was almost like a whiteout.
And so you get into Ms. Reed's vehicle, correct?
Yes.
And you're driving that vehicle from your house to Meadows Ave, is that correct?
Yes.
That's Mr. O'Keefe's house?
Yes.
You're familiar with that residence? You've been there plenty of times before?
Yes.
Now, with respect to Kerry Roberts, did you know Kerry Roberts prior to this morning of January 29th?
I had met her once before.
And can you describe for the jury sort of the circumstances of that or how you knew her prior to January 29th?
Way back when, after John's sister and brother-in-law died, I would have Kaylee a lot and Kerry would have Patrick. And one day John said, I get a discount at Reebok. I'm going to take you guys for sneakers, get all your kid sizes. So he took Kerry and myself and we went to Reebok. We bought sneakers for all my girls and me. And then he took Kerry and I to the hillside for lunch just to thank him for, helping, because that's what he did.
Now, was Kerry Roberts someone that you had as a contact saved in your phone? Had you ever texted her or called her or talked to her over your phone before?
No.
So you indicated that Ms. Roberts then calls Ms. Reed's phone while you're in Ms. Reed's car, correct?
Yes.
Now, as far as that, Ms. Reed's phone, was that similar to your phone that earlier in the morning? Was that hooked up in any way or matched or paired with the vehicle that you were driving?
Yes.
So fair to say you could hear both sides of the conversation as far as Ms. Reed talking next to you and then obviously Ms. Roberts on the other end?
Yes.
So the conversation that you were talking about as far as Ms. Roberts saying, shut up and we're going to Meadows Ave and all of that, you could hear Ms. Roberts saying that?
Yes.
Now, the vehicle, when you get into the defendant's vehicle, she pulled in straight into your driveway, is that correct?
Yes.
So fair to say you had to back out of the driveway, correct?
Correct.
Now, when you were operating Ms. Reed's vehicle in reverse, what, if anything, showed up in sort of the center console area of that vehicle?
I do not remember. I don't know.
Do you recall anything as far as the camera or anything like that?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
You back the vehicle out of the driveway, and you proceed to Meadows Ave, correct?
Yes.
And about how long a drive is it from your house to Mr. O'Keefe's?
Approximately 5-6 minutes.
And when you get to Mr. O'Keefe's house, where do you park?
I pull in the straight in the driveway.
And after you pull into the driveway, at some point you all get out, correct?
Yes,
Do you recall who pulled in first as far as who was in front of who on the way to Meadows, yourself or Miss Roberts?
I believe I was in front.
You would have pulled into the driveway and parked, and Miss Roberts would have pulled in and parked behind, correct?
Yes.
And so after the three of you get out of your respective vehicles, what happened then?
Karen brings us to the back of the car and says, look, see, I have a cracked taillight.
And where on the vehicle was she directing yourself and Miss Roberts' attentions?
The back right.
So the passenger side, rear part of the vehicle.
Yes.
And when you looked at that area of the vehicle, what could you see of that?
I saw that there were missing pieces, but there was also snow covering it. And Karen was screaming, look, look. And then Kerry was screaming back at her. It was very chaotic. So I didn't stare in depth, but what I can tell you is I saw missing pieces from the taillight.
And at some point, about how long a period of time is this that you're out in Mr. O'Keefe's driveway looking at the cracked taillight?
Not long, because then Kerry's, yelling at her, telling her she's crazy and that she was driving around drunk and she could have hit anything, and kind of rushes us to go into the house to look in there for John.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask if I could publish on the screen what's been marked as exhibit number 2.
Okay.
And Ms. McCabe, do you recognize what's up on the screen?
I do.
What is that?
That is Meadows Ave, John's house.
And the driveway that you're talking about as far as where you pulled in, that's not visible in this photograph, correct?
Correct.
So from facing Mr. O'Keefe's house on Meadows, which side of the photograph would the driveway be, the left or the right?
The right.
I'm just showing you another photograph. Just ask you to look at that. Look up to the finish.
Okay.
And you recognize what's in that photograph?
Yes,
What do you recognize?
that's John's car.
And where is John's car in relation to John's house?
It's parked to the side of the driveway.
And you also see sort of the garage area in that photograph?
Yes.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm going to seek to introduce in a minute as the next.
Objection.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could publish that to the jury now as well.
Okay.
Now, Mr. McCabe, with reference to what's up on the screen, is that the photo that you just had before you?
Yes.
And there are 2 garage doors on the house at One Meadows Ave, correct?
Correct.
Left and a right, is that fair way?
Yes.
And you've been inside Mr. O'Keefe's house a number of times before, correct?
Yes.
Now, with respect to the garage door on the left, what was contained within that part of the garage?
His old-fashioned car.
One that Kaylee didn't like?
Yes.
And on the right side of the garage, what, if anything, was in there?
It's pretty open.
How would you describe Mr. O'Keefe as far as how he kept things around his house, either in the house or the lawn or things around?
John was very meticulous. Everything had its place.
Now, when you arrived there on the morning of the 29th, Mr. O'Keefe's vehicle wasn't parked in that position, correct?
Correct.
From sort of the outside of the residence, were you aware of there being any sort of security cameras or anything affixed to the house of One Meadows Ave at that time?
Yes.
And how were you aware of that?
John told us I don't remember, years prior, I believe, he came over and he was so excited that he got in a ring and he would always show us it. He just was always watching.
And when he would show you that, How would he show you? Like on what kind of device?
On his phone,
So he had the ring application hooked up to his cell phone.
yes.
Now, with respect to that morning when you arrived, if you could, using the laser pointer, just sort of delineate for the jury whereabouts you had parked Ms. Reed's vehicle when you pulled in and you see it in this photo.
So it would be right there because John's car was further over,
So Mr. O'Keefe's car was further over to the fence.
towards the fence, yes.
And so when you arrive there, you're looking at the taillight, and at some point you go in the house, correct?
Correct.
How did you get into the house that morning?
The right garage door was open.
Now, is that something normal as far as when you get to Mr. O'Keefe's house that a garage door is open in a snowstorm?
No,
And so you go in through the garage door and then you go into the house, correct?
yes.
And it's going to need to take it. So, Ms. McCabe, if you could describe to the jury sort of how you, when you come in through that right garage door and you start to go into the house, what is it when you see when you first come into the house, and what is sort of the layout of Mr. O'Keefe's house?
You walk in from the garage and there's a mudroom.
And typically when you would walk into Mr. O'Keefe's house, what, if anything, would you or anyone else do when they walked into his house?
Take off your shoes.
And why was that?
He didn't want dirt or that morning snow probably getting all over his house.
And so that was a pretty well-known rule for anybody that spent any time at his house on Meadows End.
Yes.
And so when you and Ms. Roberts and Ms. Reed walked into the home that morning, into the mudroom, what did you do? What did Ms. Roberts do? What did Ms. Reed do?
I took off my boots or shoes, whatever I had on. Carrie Roberts took off. Karen just ran straight in the house.
You and Ms. Roberts both took off your shoes, and Ms. Reed then just walked into the house with boots or shoes or whatever she was wearing on.
Yes.
And then once you get into the house, where is it that the three of you went respectively once you got in?
We all dispersed. I looked in the TV room where there is a couch. Then I kind of walked through a dining room, and then I peeked into a living room. I went upstairs. I looked in John's room. Carrie was also running around different rooms. And then I went into Kaylee's room.
And during this time when you and Ms. Roberts are sort of going around room to room, what was the defendant?
I'm not sure.
Did you see her doing the same thing that you were doing?
No.
Now, with respect to, you went at least peeked into John's bedroom, is that right?
Yes.
What, if anything, did you note about the bed when you looked?
It was made.
And so then you go into Kaylee's room and check on her, correct?
Yes.
And at any point in time, did you see Patrick at any point?
No.
And were you aware of where Patrick was, or did you know at that point?
At that point, I believe Kaylee told me he was at a sleepover.
So you have some conversation with Kaylee, is that right?
Yes.
And about how long a conversation did you have with Kaylee?
Probably about a few minutes.
And when you left from Kaylee, what is it that you said to her as you were leaving?
Objection.
Oh,
I promised Kaylee. I promised Kaylee that I would find John and everything was going to be okay.
So after that, where did the three of you go from there?
After that, the three of us got in the car and we drove to Fairview.
And when you say you got into the car, which part of the game?
Kerry's.
Madam Mayor, approach.
yes.
Again, I'm showing you two photographs again. If you could just look at those and look up when you're finished. recognize what's in those photographs?
Yes,
And what do you recognize those to be?
the defendant's vehicle.
And, may I approach?
Yes.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth seeks to introduce them as the next two exhibits.
No objection, Your Honor, thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, with the court's permission, if I could publish those jury as well. Ms. McCabe, what's depicted in this photograph is the defendant Ms. Reed's vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And in sort of focus here is the right rear passenger side of that vehicle, correct?
Correct.
And the taillight, if you could, with the laser pointer, just direct the jury's attention to where you observe that. Now, ma'am, with respect to what's depicted in this photograph as far as any damage that you observed to this taillight area on the rear passenger side, is that consistent with what you observed in the driveway at One of Meadows Ave when the defendant was showing?
Correct, minus the snow, etc.
And Ms. Gilman, if I could have the next exhibit. And again, do you recognize what's depicted in this photograph?
Yes,
And this is essentially a closer image of that same rear passenger side taillight area, correct?
yes,
Again, what's depicted in this, is that consistent with what you observed minus sort of the caked in snow when you were in the driveway of Mr. O'Keefe's house on the morning of the 29th?
yes.
Thank you. Gilman, you can take that down, and Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would ask to publish just a short portion of, actually, I'm sorry. If I could publish a portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 6, which is the ring camera from the driveway.
Okay.
Ms. Gilman, if I could have video number 154 from the driveway. Pause that just for a moment. Ms. McCabe, directing your attention up to the screen, what's been marked as Exhibit 6 or video from Exhibit 6. Do you recognize what's depicted in this video?
I do.
What do you recognize?
That's myself getting out of the car at Meadows Ave.
Is that essentially where you parked Ms. Reed's vehicle when you pulled in?
Yes,
If you could, just direct the jury's attention with the laser pointer as to where Ms. Reed's vehicle is that you parked, and if you see Ms. Roberts' vehicle.
that is Miss Reed's, and that would be Miss Roberts.
And as far as the right garage door that you entered into the house, if you could direct the jury's attention to whereabouts that would, I know it's not on the video, but where would it be?
Walk straight.
If you could run this in its entirety. Mr. McCabe, what was depicted in that video, is that consistent with what you observed, the weather conditions to be around the time that you arrived at Mr. O'Keefe's house?
Yes,
And lastly, in this line, Your Honor, if I, with the court's permission, could publish just a very short portion of what's been marked as Exhibit 41. Gentlemen, if I could ask you to fast forward this to about 2 hours and 10 minutes. If you could play from there. Stop there. And again, what's in this video, do you recognize that, Mr. Kid?
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that?
That is John's house.
And this gentleman, if you could play from there. Now, what's depicted in this video, sort of the screen directly in front of you, do you recognize what that
Yes,
is? What do you recognize that?
John's driveway.
As far as what, if anything, do you observe in John's driveway?
John's car and Karen's car.
And where, if you could, using the laser pointer, just direct your attention to where is the defendant's car and where is Mr. O'Keefe's?
Mr. O'Keefe's car and the defendant's.
And where you observe the defendant's car to be, is that essentially where you parked it at that time?
Yes.
Now, may I have a moment?
Okay.
You may just hold me on.
Sure. I'll see counsel at sidebar for just a minute.